I pulled my station wagon up to the curb of the house I had helped my daughter buy, only to find three strange cars leaking oil onto the front lawn. I had driven 400 miles without calling first. Sarah's birthday was tomorrow, and I had a handmade quilt folded in the passenger seat, meant for the guest room we had painted together 6 months ago. The house looked tired. The curtains were drawn tight in the middle of a beautiful autumn afternoon. Empty soda cans and a muddy pair of work boots littered the front porch. I didn't bother knocking. I used the spare key Sarah had given me and pushed the front door open. The smell hit me instantly: stale cigarette smoke, fried garlic, and the heavy, damp scent of too many adults occupying too little space. The hallway was lined with jackets, none of them belonging to my daughter. I walked toward the kitchen, my boots quiet on the hardwood floors. I had personally helped sand and finish. I heard Sarah before I saw her. She was crying. Not a loud, dramatic weep, but the exhausted, breathless gasps of someone who had been holding it in for weeks. I stepped into the doorway. Sarah stood at the sink, furiously scrubbing a massive roasting pan. The counters were buried under dirty plates, half-empty cereal boxes, and smeared butter wrappers. "Sarah," I called out softly. She jumped, dropping the sponge. Her eyes were bloodshot, dark circles carving hollows into her pale cheeks. She wore an oversized t-shirt stained with cooking oil. "Mom." She wiped her wet hands on her jeans, looking terrified rather than happy. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, a loud voice barked from the living room. "Sarah, we need more ice in here, and bring the chips." Sarah flinched. She actually shrank into herself, her shoulders curving inward as she reached for a bag of chips on the counter. I reached out, grabbed her wrist gently, and pulled the bag from her hands. "Who is in your living room?" I asked, my voice completely flat. "David's mother," Sarah whispered, staring at the floor. "And his brother. They needed a place to stay." I didn't ask how long they had been there. The grease stains on the stove and the exhausted slump of my daughter's spine told me everything. I set my bag on the clean edge of the counter. I wasn't leaving. A woman appeared in this kitchen doorway a moment later. She was tall, with stiffly sprayed hair and a faded floral robe that she wore with unearned authority. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes narrowing as they flicked over my sensible slacks and traveling sweater. "Who are you?" she demanded, crossing her arms. "I am Joyce Bryant," I replied, not breaking eye contact. "Sarah's mother." The woman snorted, unimpressed. "I'm Brenda, David's mother. Sarah, I asked for ice 5 minutes ago. Greg's game is paused." Sarah moved instinctively toward the freezer, but I stepped in her path. I looked at Brenda. "Sarah is busy. If Greg wants ice, Greg knows how to walk." Brenda's jaw dropped. She glared at Sarah, expecting her to apologize and scurry over, but Sarah remained frozen behind me. "This is my son's house," Brenda snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "We are guests." "No," I corrected calmly. "This is Sarah's house." "I know. Because I wrote the check for the down payment," Brenda sneered, turning on her heel and marching back to the living room, shouting for David. A minute later, my son-in-law walked in. He looked perfectly comfortable in sweatpants, a game controller still in one hand. He refused to meet my eyes. "Joyce," he mumbled, "didn't know you were coming." "Clearly," I noted, gesturing to the mountain of dishes. "Why is my daughter crying over a sink while your family watches television?" David shifted his weight. Mom and Greg are just going through a rough patch. It's temporary. Sarah's just stressed about work. I work 2 shifts now, Sarah whispered from behind me. To cover the groceries. My chest tightened, but I kept my face utterly blank. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture David on what it meant to be a husband. Words were useless against people who had already convinced themselves they were entitled to your life. I'll be staying, I announced, picking up my bag. Sarah, you and I will share the master bedroom. David, you can sleep on the couch. Your family is already using the guest beds. David opened his mouth to protest, but I walked past him without waiting for permission. I woke up at 5 the next morning. The house was dead quiet, filled only with the heavy snoring coming from the 2 guest rooms down the hall. I went into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. It was packed with expensive cuts of meat, premium energy drinks, and brand-name snacks. I checked the pantry. Same story. Sarah's modest salary from the clinic wasn't buying this. She was drowning in debt to feed them. When Sarah tiptoed into the kitchen at 6, dressed in her scrubs, I was sitting at the small breakfast table with 2 cups of black coffee. Sit, I commanded gently. She collapsed into the chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Mom, I'm sorry about last night. David says I'm making a big deal out of nothing. They just need a few more weeks. How long have they been here? I asked. 4 months. I pulled a notepad from my purse. Show me your bank app. She hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. But she unlocked her phone and slid it across the table. My stomach turned cold. Her savings account, the one she had built for emergencies, was entirely drained. Her credit cards were nearly maxed out. Charges from local grocery delivery apps, premium cable subscriptions, and high-end takeout lined the screen. Greg likes ordering food, Sarah whispered. If I don't pay for it. Brenda yells at David, and David gets mad at me for causing tension. Tension ends today, I stated, pushing the phone back to her. You are going to work. When you come home, you will not cook. You will not clean. But Brenda, I will handle Brenda. At 9 o'clock, the herd finally stirred. Brenda shuffled into the kitchen, followed by Greg, a grown man pushing 40 who looked annoyed to be awake. Where's breakfast? Brenda demanded, staring at the empty, sparkling clean stove. Sarah usually makes eggs. I didn't look up from my book. Sarah is at work. The frying pan is in the cabinet. Crack them yourself. Greg scoffed. I'm not cooking. I'll just order breakfast. Go right ahead. I smiled, turning the page. But you'll be using your own card. Greg tapped furiously on his phone, trying to order his usual massive breakfast platter through Sarah's delivery account. I watched him from the corner of my eye. Why isn't this working? He grumbled, slapping the phone against his palm. It says, payment declined. I turned the page of my book. When Sarah had left for work, I had her log into every single account: food delivery, Amazon, the internet provider, and the utility company. We changed the passwords and deleted her saved credit cards from all of them. Must be a glitch, I offered mildly. Brenda slammed a cabinet door. This is ridiculous. We'll just watch TV until David wakes up. He'll fix it. They stomped into the living room. 5 minutes later, I heard Greg yelling. I walked in to find him holding the remote, staring furiously at a blank screen. The Wi-Fi is down and the cable. Greg shouted. I know, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. I called the provider this morning. Sarah was paying for the premium sports package and the highest speed gaming internet. It was too expensive, so I canceled it. The basic plan gets installed next week. Brenda's face flushed a deep, ugly red. You have no right. My son lives here. Your son is not on the deed, I reminded her, keeping my voice low and steady. Sarah's name is on this house. My name is on this house. If you want high-speed internet, you can call the company and put it in your name. David! Brenda shrieked, marching down the hall to pound on the master bedroom door. David stumbled out, rubbing his eyes, looking between his furious mother and me. Joyce! What is going on? He groaned. Mom says you cut the internet. I helped Sarah balance her budget. I stated simply. She can no longer afford to subsidize your brother's gaming habits. If you have a problem with it, David, you are welcome to pay the bill from your own account. David swallowed hard. We both knew he hadn't held a steady job in 6 months. He looked at his mother, then at me, and quietly walked back into the bedroom, shutting the door. By lunchtime, the house felt like a pressure cooker. Without the internet or cable, Greg was pacing the floors, muttering under his breath. Brenda was aggressively slamming dishes in the kitchen, trying to scrape together a meal from the pantry. I sat at the dining table, sipping tea, watching her pull out boxes of imported pasta and jars of expensive sauce that Sarah had paid for. Those belong to my daughter, I observed. Brenda whipped around. We have to eat. We are family. You are guests who have overstayed your welcome by 3 months and 3 weeks, I corrected. You eat what you buy. I stood up, walked over to the pantry, and calmly pulled the doors shut. From my pocket, I produced the heavy brass padlock and latch kit I had purchased at the hardware store during my morning walk. Brenda watched in stunned silence as I took a cordless drill from the kitchen drawer and screwed the latch directly into the wooden doors. I snapped the padlock shut and pocketed the key. Are you insane? Brenda yelled, her voice echoing off the walls. You can't lock up the food. I bought those groceries this morning. I lied smoothly. They belong to me. The refrigerator is next if you don't step back. Greg stormed into the kitchen, his fists clenched. You're treating us like animals in our own house. This is not your house, I replied, staring him down without blinking. You have contributed nothing. You have paid nothing. You have treated my daughter like a maid. David rushed in, drawn by the yelling. Joyce, please, this is too far. You're embarrassing me. I turned to my son-in-law. I am not embarrassing you. David, you embarrassed yourself the day you let another woman turn your wife into a servant. Now, you have a choice. You can go to the store and buy food for your mother and brother, or they can go hungry. I don't care which. I left them staring at the locked pantry and went out to the back porch, breathing in the crisp October air. When Sarah got home from her second shift, she looked like she might collapse. She walked into this kitchen, expecting the usual chaos of demands and dirty dishes. Instead, the kitchen was spotless. The house, however, was dead silent. Brenda and Greg were sitting in the dark living room, arms crossed, fuming. David was nowhere to be seen. Mom, Sarah asked, looking around nervously. Where is everyone? Why is the TV off? Budget cuts, I said, handing her a plate of warm chicken and vegetables I had cooked just for us. Eat. As Sarah sat down, Brenda marched out of the shadows. She didn't scream this time. She held something in her hand. It was the blue ceramic vase I had painted for Sarah when she graduated college. It was shattered into 3 jagged pieces. Brenda dropped the pieces onto the kitchen table, right next to Sarah's dinner plate. Oh, no! Sarah choked out, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears instantly spilled over her lashes. "It was an accident," Brenda sneered, though her eyes were cold and triumphant. "I was dusting. It just slipped. Things get broken when people are stressed, I suppose." She was waiting for me to explode. She wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to lose my temper so she could play the victim for David. I didn't yell. I didn't even stand up. I looked at the broken pieces of my daughter's favorite possession, then looked up at Brenda. "I see," I murmured. "Accidents happen." Brenda smirked, thinking she had won, and turned back to the living room. Sarah sobbed quietly, trying to push the ceramic shards together. I reached across the table and covered my daughter's shaking hands with my own. "Stop crying, Sarah. Tears won't fix the vase. And they won't fix this house." I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts. I didn't need a lawyer. I didn't need the police. I only needed a business that operated early in the morning and asked very few questions as long as the invoice was paid in cash. I hit dial. The next morning at 7:10 a.m., a massive white box truck backed into the driveway, the engine rumbling loudly enough to rattle the windows. I was waiting on the front porch with a thermos of coffee. 3 large men wearing work gloves stepped out of the cab. "Joyce Bryant?" the foreman asked, checking his clipboard. "That's me," I said, leading them inside. 2 bedrooms down the hall. Take the mattresses, the bed frames, the dressers, and the living room couches. Everything goes to the donation center. "Wait! What is happening?" Greg yelled, bursting out of his room in his boxers as 2 movers breezed past him and started dismantling his bed. Brenda flew out of her room, her hair in wild disarray. "Stop! What are you doing? You can't take our beds." "They aren't your beds," I corrected, leaning against the wall. "I bought the bedroom sets when Sarah moved in. I have the receipts in my purse. I decided I no longer like the style. I'm donating them." "You can't do this!" Brenda shrieked, trying to physically block a mover who was easily carrying her mattress down the hallway. The mover looked at me. "Ma'am, keep moving," I instructed. "If they interfere, take the bedroom doors off the hinges too. I own those as well." David stumbled out of the master bedroom, his face pale with shock. "Joyce, stop! They won't have anywhere to sleep. They can sleep on the floor," I stated casually. "Or they can go find a hotel. The couches are leaving too, so the living room is out of the question." In less than 45 minutes, the house was stripped of its comfort. The guest rooms were hollow, echoing spaces. The living room held nothing but a TV stand and a rug. The movers loaded the last recliner, tipped their hats to me, and drove away. Brenda stood in the empty living room, shaking with rage. "You are a monster." "I am a homeowner," I replied, "and my house is currently undergoing renovations." The reality of an empty house settled in quickly. There were no beds to retreat to, no couches to lounge on, and no Wi-Fi to distract them. The house was just a cold shell of hardwood and locked cabinets. David finally found his spine, though he used it for the wrong woman. He marched into the kitchen where Sarah and I were quietly washing our breakfast dishes. "This ends now," David demanded, pointing a finger at me. "You are going to buy new furniture today, and you are going to apologize to my mother. You have humiliated my family." Sarah stopped washing the plate. She looked at David, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. The exhaustion in her eyes was suddenly replaced by a sharp, quiet clarity. "No," Sarah said. David blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no." Sarah dried her hands on a towel. "My mother isn't apologizing, and neither am I. I have worked 60-hour weeks to feed your brother. I have cleaned up after your mother while she insults me. I am done." Brenda marched up behind David. "You ungrateful little brat. We are family." I stepped forward, putting myself between Brenda and my daughter. "Your definition of family is parasitical. You have 24 hours to pack your bags and leave. If you are still here tomorrow morning, I will hire a contractor to come remove the toilets for maintenance." "You can't kick us out," Greg yelled from the hallway. "We have squatters' rights." I laughed. It was a dry, raspy sound. "You have no furniture, no internet, no food, and no comfort. Stay if you want. But tomorrow, the hot water heater gets disconnected." I looked directly at David. "You have a choice. Have a choice to make. You can pack your bags and leave with the people you prioritize, or you can stay here and learn how to be a partner to my daughter. But the freeloading ends today." David looked at his mother. Then he looked at Sarah. He didn't say a word. David's silence was his answer. He didn't fight for his wife. He didn't beg for her forgiveness. He simply walked into the master bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. Brenda looked smug for a brief second, thinking David was making a stand that would force Sarah to break. But Sarah didn't break. She stood completely still, watching the man she married pack his clothes into a duffel bag. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," Brenda hissed, dragging her own overstuffed luggage down the hallway. "He's a good man. You'll never find someone else to put up with you." "I don't want anyone to put up with me," Sarah replied, her voice remarkably steady. "I want to breathe in my own home." Greg lugged his gaming PC out the front door, muttering curses under his breath. He didn't even look back. David zipped his bag and walked to the front door. He paused, looking at Sarah one last time, waiting for her to cry or ask him to stay. I watched my daughter carefully. Her hands were curled into loose fists at her sides, but she kept her chin high. She walked over to him and held out her hand. The house key. David. His face flushed. He dug into his pocket, unclipped the brass key from his ring, and dropped it into her palm. He walked out the door, the hinges squeaking slightly as it closed behind him. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or sad. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing. It was the sound of safety. Sarah looked at the key in her hand, then looked up at me. She didn't cry. Instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs completely for the first time since I had arrived. "I'll call a locksmith," she said quietly. "Good idea." I nodded. "Then we order a pizza. I have the key to the padlock." 3 weeks later, the house smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. We had spent the first week ripping up the carpets in the guest rooms, exposing the beautiful original hardwood underneath. We spent the second week painting the walls a bright, cheerful yellow, a color Brenda had once explicitly stated she despised. Sarah was different. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She had quit her second job at the clinic and started coming home at 5 o'clock. Sometimes, I caught her just standing in the middle of the living room, enjoying the absolute, unbroken silence of her own space. David had called twice. Sarah let both calls go to voicemail. He had made his choice when he packed his bag, and she was no longer interested in negotiating her peace. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, scrambling eggs while the coffee brewed. The padlock was gone from the pantry. The new furniture we had ordered was arriving next week. But for now, we were perfectly happy sitting on folding chairs at the kitchen table. Sarah walked into the kitchen, her hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing a paint-splattered shirt. She held 2 mugs of coffee, setting one down beside my plate. "I was thinking," Sarah said, pulling out a chair, "the second bedroom would make a really good sewing room for you. If you wanted to stay a while longer." I looked at my daughter. She wasn't asking out of fear or desperation. She was asking because she wanted me there. "I think I'd like that." I smiled, picking up my mug. There had been no dramatic courtroom battles, no police escorts, and no screaming matches in the street. I had simply removed the foundation of their comfort until the house could no longer hold them. We had reclaimed the space, inch by inch, until it belonged to us again. I took a sip of my coffee, watching the autumn sunlight stream through the spotless kitchen window. Finally, we were home.